All right. Well, we're certainly glad that you're here, and just a wonderful, warm night somewhere, I'm sure. It's not here, but it's always nice to think of Florida or California during this time. But I'm certainly glad that you're here and brave the cold weather. We've got a hot topic, though, so we're good. We're glad about that. And I'm glad for those of you that are online watching each week. We get people online. Let me challenge you a little bit. We're thinking seriously of really kicking this off and getting our online presence on Tuesday nights strong. And I'm looking for thousands of people eventually to join us on this continuing saga, you might say. Well, we'll just go through the 50 lessons, do it over, but where people can have this kind of knowledge. I'm going to be doing a lot of different seminars, which will give people some of the stuff, but then how do you get more? And so the real secret is in that week-to-week knowledge, the week-to-week. And even if you don't learn much, it's holding you accountable, right? When you're sitting there. And so, and with it being online, of course, you can watch it anytime during the week. And here's something for those of you locally here, those here, and those watching locally here. March 5th, we're going to be having a seminar right here at Moraine Valley Church from 9 o'clock to 5:30, 8-hour seminar on overcoming anxiety. And we're going to take a lot of what we teach here, putting it into an all-day seminar, and it will include your lunch, 2 snacks, plus I'm giving out a free book on how to use the Word of God emotionally, and then we'll have the class notes as well. So it's going to be a great seminar. Lunch and everything, we're selling it for $25, so you can't beat that price. And you can go to www.ronovit.com/MVC, Moraine Valley Church, MVC, and you can find out more information on it. And there's a brochure in there and everything else that will tell you as much as you need to know about it. So you can start telling people about it, invite them to come. But that's going to be March 5th, and that's going to be for all, young people as well as old people. It's going to be for everyone. I'd love to see a lot of teenagers there. They're going through so much right now. Anxiety is an epidemic. So it's going to be a great seminar. So put that down, March 5th, Saturday, right here at Moraine Valley Church. Start telling friends, ronovit.com/MVC. And you can start looking at that information. Pass it on, put it on Facebook, get it out there, okay? Well, tonight we're going to be looking at knowing our emotional self. And what do we do with those emotions that are intense, right? And we're going to start talking about that. We'll have Part 1 this week, Part 2 next week. But let's just open in prayer, ask God to speak to our hearts, and we'll get going. Father, I thank you, Lord, for your love for us. I thank you, Lord, that you know us. And Lord, I'm just totally blown away each week as I think of your grace and mercy, as I've been thinking about reparenting so much lately, and how you are a good, good Father. And how you want us, Lord, to know that and to sense that and to know that we're your beloved children. Lord, might that just permeate our minds tonight as we go through this. That, Lord, some of these lies and these negative things that we believe would, Lord, be taken care of, be uprooted out of our lives, that we'll know who we are in you. And that, Lord, will be set free from some of the bondages that this negativity brings. So, Lord, we just give you tonight. Thank you for what you're going to do in Jesus' name. Amen. Childhood trauma causes us to look through a lens. Now, there's no perfect family. I mean, good families, bad families. I'm going to go through some things that cause dysfunction in a few minutes, and you'll see that it's easy to have dysfunction. And I think every family on earth, except for the one I raised, probably has dysfunction. Don't ask my kids. They'll tell you, they'll keep you up all night. But anyways, I'm still paying for their counseling. But no. But there are no perfect families. There aren't. And even if things were good, interpretations, right? You got siblings. Don't tell me siblings don't cause problems, And, I remember my brother once told me, he says, Ron, you're not, you don't have an inferiority complex. You're inferior. I said, bam, thank you very much there, So, you don't have to go very far to get some beliefs. And here's the thing, and I say it over and over, but we got to start understanding this. It was a child that heard it. A child. That's right, we were children once, right? It was a child that heard it. And just like if a little child, I have my grandkids come over all the time. It's easy for them to misunderstand things. And they get so emotional. And what do? You calm them down. We're the emotional regulators, right? Well, what if we didn't have the emotional regulators? What if there wasn't anyone there to regulate it? Instead, they were really causing it. Well, then what do? You believe these things. And your brain starts to protect you from these things. And that amygdala starts with that little radar going around, right? And pretty soon you see evidence. And now you don't want it no more because it causes a certain pain. No one wants to be shamed. No one wants to think that they're inferior. No one wants to be compared in a negative way, right? And so these things happen, and it colors the lens through which we see life. And they become core beliefs. So if we think of ourselves as worthless, and it isn't like we go around all the time, but you'll be surprised sometimes that feeling we have when we get up in the morning. Sometimes when we wake up and we go, what's behind that? If we could pull the curtain real fast, maybe we'd see some of these negative things we're believing. But we don't go there all the time. I wish we could, in a way, because they're lies. I wish we could wake up in the morning and see all the things that we're going to believe negative that day and say, these are lies, and get an eraser and just erase them. And then start over. Start over. And in a way, we can. The meditation can do that. When you're praying in the morning, you can talk to God about these things. Lord, this is what I'm feeling. I mean, we can use an eraser to some degree, but not if we're not aware of it. Because these things happen so fast, they become embodied. They're not cognitive so much, and we just start moving. And so we start seeing things. And so we start wearing a mask. We go to work with a mask on. We want to avoid conflict or people-pleasing. I told you last week that I'm reading this book, Pleasing You is Killing Me. I'm telling you what, reading the book is killing me. I can only get through, I do a little bit every day, and I'm telling you what, I put the book on the bottom of the stack, praying that I'll get a phone call or something, where I don't have to get to it, Oh, he is just pounding me. Oh, boundaries and all these things that I hate to do, But it's good. I'm learning. It's never too old to learn. Never too old to learn. And these things are good. And I know I'm better than I was before, but I want to be better than I am now. And I want to learn these things. And so that's what we're here for, to learn, right? And I hope that you get encouraged and that you can start catching yourself when you're pleasing people. When you're wearing a mask, when you're avoiding it, start asking yourself, why am I doing this? It doesn't mean it's going to change right away, but if you start asking the right questions, right, pretty soon we might start getting the right answers. But at least we're being inquisitive, okay? And that's what helps, okay? And so a lot of times we don't want to face anything that will pop up and make us feel worse than we do, because these things don't feel good. If you watch children enough, and because I'm sensitive to it because of my own life, you can see when someone says something negative to, a sibling might pick on another one, right? Have you ever seen the look in the face when the child feels that they've been shamed or put down? Do you ever look at their face? It isn't a happy face. I mean, it's a whole kind of thing. And my heart just grabs my heart. And that's what that little child is just. And you know what? Pretty soon they forget it and they're back to playing and that. But have they really forgot it? And if it's done once, it's probably done twice. My wife, she's always got me looking for mice. Make sure that there's so I do things to make sure there's no mice. And one time we saw one. She said, "Well, if there's one, there's another." And if there's two, you know there's going to be more. And that's kind of how it is sometimes, right? These little mice thoughts come, and boy, if there's one, if we believe it once, we're going to believe it again and again and again. And I'm saying this not to discourage us. I'm saying this to wake us up, okay? Because they're lies, they're lies, they're lies, and that's the good news. All we have to do is start exposing them and start believing the truth. And that's easier said than done, but it's certainly better than what we're doing sometimes, right? So be encouraged that as we start finding out what some of these negative things are, we can start believing the truth. So what happens is that a lot of times these things become memories. That time when you felt bad, you were at the party and you got humiliated, and you did the shame, that might be forgotten right now. Times that you were teased might forget, but something's going to trigger it. Something will trigger it. Maybe it's, maybe it's a certain person at work that acts just like that person did at school. That's something they said, and all of a sudden, boom, you're right back there in fifth grade. But you're here now, but all of a sudden it starts going, well, those are implicit memories. Implicit means they're out of awareness. They're there, they're out of awareness, but the amygdala has tied into the memory the sensations. What's that mean? What you saw, what you heard, what you smelled, what you touched, whatever sensation was relevant to that, it puts it on guard because it doesn't want you to experience it again. Right? If there was a hot stove and you touched it, what sensation? Touch. Now, what other sensations would be involved, you think, with a hot stove? Okay, heat. You could feel a little radiating heat. The red glow if it was electric one, or the flames, right? So you'd have something you could see, maybe something you could hear if it was a, loud flame noise, gas or whatever. So there'd be a lot of senses you could feel. You could be walking by and all of a sudden feel the heat, right? The flames on you. Go, what's that? And you'd be surprised what it could do. My mother was burned in a fire when she was a young girl, and she was pretty sensitive to fire, and she never learned to swim neither because of that. She never wanted to be without in a bathing suit kind of thing. And so she was afraid of the water. Well, guess who learned some of those things? I did, right? I didn't learn to swim till I was in high school. And the only reason I did is because we had to graduate. We had an Olympic-sized pool in the school. And the only way I learned is because my friend threw me in the water. And, he wasn't much of a friend. But anyways, I did start to learn how to swim. Well, in her book, Bouncing Back, and we're on page 1, and by the way, if you don't have the notes, you can write me at ron@empowerministry.org, ron@empowerministry.org, and I'll be happy to send you the notes and put you on our email list. In her book, Bouncing Back, Linda Graham shares that our emotions are products of early conditioning, and to change, we need to be deconditioned and then reconditioned, okay? That is what we do with emotional relearning, and that's, the third part of what we're going to be getting into in a little while, emotional relearning. We attempt to discover and cancel our belief about ourselves in an actual memory. That's the deconditioning. Then, in that same memory visitation, we change the belief about ourselves in that memory. This is the reconditioning. The new interpretation retrains the amygdala and prefrontal cortex to respond differently. So when a perception comes and reminds us of the same past event, our mind will allow it to come into awareness with the new revised interpretation and meaning. It's safe now. Now, the only caveat there, and you might want to write this in the border, is that it needs to be repeated over and over. Remember, the lie was repeated over and over and over again. One humiliation isn't going to change you for life. Yeah, maybe if it was bad enough, okay, if it's bad enough. But the point is, it was those little, the proverb says, the little foxes spoil the vine. And it's that continuing thing. Well, likewise, we have a negativity bias, and to overcome that, we're going to have to learn these lessons and then repeat them. And say them out loud and believe them. And just like I've had to do in believing in God's unconditional love that he has for me. And I've had to say that over till I could finally get that hook that he does indeed love me. Well, when a new perception comes and reminds us, saying that, then it's done. The alarm doesn't go off. And childhood can shape how we think and emote, have emotions. It can be all kinds of family situation that can allow us to assume negative beliefs about ourselves and others, God, life itself. Here's some causes of dysfunctional families. It could be that there was an abusive parent. Now, a lot of times that's a hard thing to say. And I've counseled people who have come in and told me some of their situations, and they'd never admit that their parents were abusive. And yet I'm sitting there knowing that this was an abuse situation. And you'd go and, how they tell me how they got hit with the, stick, and, Dad was so angry and all this stuff. And I'd go, well, they say, oh, no, you don't know how bad I was. Oh, no, I deserve that one. And, and I get it, but the point is that's our normal. That might have been their normal. And it's not wrong to understand that maybe things weren't the way they should be, and that's okay. We can forgive, but we need to know that some things that were our normal might not have been, right? And verbal abuse can really play on us. Different kinds of abuse. Strict, controlling, and authoritarian parents. Many of us in the church especially grew up with that. And if it's a controlling situation, doesn't give room for the children to flourish, not helping them make their own decisions, appropriate to their age, that can sometimes cause problems. Or maybe a soft parent. We went the other extreme. And you can read these, the large and extended families. I remember my first ministry in Youth for Christ back a long time ago. There was a family that I worked with that had 11 children. And by the time you have 11 children, it's like two families. And my mom was raised in a large family like that, and she was the baby. So my aunt and uncles were the same age as, my cousins were the same age as my parents. My aunts and uncles were more like, grandparents. And so you can really get different family dynamics in that. And you can have a lot of times be lost in the crowd, right? And you may not have some of your needs met the way they should have been. I'm not putting down anything. I'm just saying that it's an is. It's not anything that we're going to blame here. Personality disorder in the family, late diagnosed personality disorder can cause family dynamics that can cause issues. A chronically sick or disabled child in the family, and certainly we're not picking on a child that's, disabled or sick, but it does cause dynamics in the family, right? It's hard on a family, and that's okay, but we need to know that it may cause certain things. Unfortunate life events, family values, cultures, ethnicity, insecure nature of family attachments. You can go on, dynamics of previous dysfunctional generation. And so you can read some of these things and see deficient or absent parent. A lot of different things that go into where we can end up feeling certain things. Substance abuse and or addicted parent, can cause all kinds of things. And so as we look at these, we may say, okay, some things have caused me to believe certain things. The goal, as we look on page 3 here, the goal is to overcome the consequences of childhood trauma. The goal in this class is to help us overcome the painful emotions of childhood trauma, and we can do it in 2 ways. The first is when we're aware that we're feeling the negative effects of a traumatic experience from the past, right? So otherwise, we're aware that, a button was pushed. We know it. Someone said something. We feel bad about it. And we're aware that, we have this belief that, I don't feel good about myself, and we know where it came from, and we need to, are we going to believe that or not believe it? We need to challenge that, okay? We're used to it. Yeah, we've taken it. We've kind of owned it. But do we need to continue to own it? That's the question. The second way is to recognize that we're out of sorts. And so when we're talking about emotional recognition, one may be that, hey, I'm thinking that again. Can't believe, I really feel bad. I'm a real loser. We listen to some of the things we say about ourselves. The other is to know that I'm feeling out of sorts. And one thing that's worked with me, and I've worked in counseling, is that when we have a certain feeling, is to just stop and get in touch with that and let it take us to a memory where we felt that way before. What I've discovered is that a lot of these things have sort of like a fingerprint on it, and so when we have a certain feeling, it's been a consistent thing, and we can actually go back to a memory where we felt that way before. And what's so interesting, I've worked with people who says, well, I can't remember much of my childhood, and I understand that because that was me. When we have trauma in the family, a lot of times we don't remember things because cortisol is being pumped through our body. When you're hypervigilant, cortisol is being pumped through your body, which turns off the hippocampus, which is that part of the brain that is the memory assembler, if you will. And so a lot of times it's there, but it's not fully assembled, and so we can't recall. Instead, the amygdala is remembering all the sensations. It's doing its job. But what happens then is if we can go through the back door, and that is we get in touch with the sensations and just let it take us to a memory, all of a sudden we're doing a memory. And I remember working with people, and they'll say, oh, and they'll usually it's, if they're 40, all of a sudden they're thinking of something at 25. And before we even process that one, I was, oh, yeah, and I remember, and all of a sudden we're 13, and we're processing it. Oh, and then and all of a sudden they're 5, and I laugh. I say, I thought you couldn't remember anything. Slow it down here. But the thing is, what happens is that a lot of times these things are similar. We're thinking the same way. The emotional reaction's the same. So that's another way to get in touch with some of these, is to sit there and say, okay, what was I thinking? What was I feeling? And just let it take it to a memory, and then write it down, because you're going to forget it. It's a flash, right? Write it down, code name it, whatever it is. Christmas 1966, whatever you need to do, where you can come back to it, and then process it later. Okay, what was, and then you ask yourself the questions. What was I feeling? What was I believing? What was I believing about me? Or whatever, life, And then the big question is, well, what's the truth? Because that's where the healing comes, when we start to find out the truth. And that might take some help. But as long as you're saying that, then you might recognize that what you're believing is a lie, see? Well, then good. What's the truth? What's the truth? And so that's going to really happen. For example, in the middle of page 3, so often a person will believe that there's something wrong with them because of the trauma. For example, they could be thinking it was my fault. I can't do anything right. I'm broken and no good. And in emotional relearning, we'll challenge those beliefs and help us emotionally believe what is true about you and encourage new actions. So look at the 4 columns there. The former belief is that I am unlovable. And we need to emotionally believe the truth, the new one, that I am lovable. Now, it's not just good enough to say, oh, well, I am lovable. That's fine. You can say that. That's like trying to get a person that thinks they're ugly. Well, no, you're beautiful. And like they're going to all of a sudden believe that. They can say, well, I'm beautiful. You can write that on the board 100 times, and it might not change, right? But it's good to know where we're heading, and somehow we need to find out, why did I feel unlovable? And challenge that with the truth. Was there anyone that ever felt I was lovable? Well, no, it was Grandma. She always, Is there any other time, even the person that you felt made you feel unlovable, was there ever a moment at all that they might have loved you? Well, yeah, there was that one time. When you see what you're doing? What about God? Does God say anything in His Word about you? Does He say anything? And you start adding, because, remember geometry when you did theorems and all that stuff, postulates or whatever they were, and you could write 1,000 proof texts, but it only takes one negative proof text, right? One to prove it wrong that cancels the whole theorem. And that's kind of what we're trying to do here. I've got all this evidence that says I'm no good, but can I just find one example that maybe where I was good? I got all this feeling, not necessarily proof, but feeling that I'm unlovable. But can I find one time when I felt lovable and someone loved me? Now, you tend to think it's not going to tip the scale that much, but it's a start. It's a start. If we can let a little bit of that in, light has a way of taking over darkness, right? If we can let it in a little bit and just feel that for a second. Have you ever had a hope like that? Where you were against all hope and all of a sudden you saw just a little sliver of hope and you went, oh, you know, that's an emotional relearning. We're starting to emotionally relearn it. You mean maybe? Huh, yeah. Did you see where I'm going here? All right? And we can do this. And we want to start asking God, help me believe this. Help me see this. And then we need to amplify it. We need to amplify it in our mind. If we got that little time when Grandma hugged us, then think about that for a minute. Let her hug you again in your emotions and feel it. Let it radiate through your body. Feel it in your toes, up to the top of your head. Cherish that moment and think it, because it's an embodied, see, these are embodied beliefs, and when we can start to embody, believe it again. And that you bring it in, Lord, help me understand this, help me believe this. I remember when I was trying to really learn about myself and more love, I remember I didn't have many hugs in my life. Now, I'm a hugger. If you know me, I'm a hugger. I hug, and because COVID thing's kind of thrown it off a little bit, but I am a hugger. And but then once I remembered thinking, I hardly get anyone to hug me, and boy, I just remember, I said, Lord, I need a hug, and I just took my arms and went right around me. And I'm telling you, I didn't let go for about 30 seconds or whatever. It takes about 20 seconds for oxytocin to kick in, which is that good feel hormone, that love hormone. And, if you got someone that doesn't mind and and they know you and they love you, hug them for 20 seconds and let that oxytocin start going. Well, that's what we need to do sometimes. We need to let these things in long enough that they start to permeate some of our brain, okay? So the new beliefs, I'm lovable. The old behavior is depression. The new one should be a sense of peace. And you can go down the line. I'm insignificant. We want to get to where we start to believe. Was there any time you were significant? You see how that negativity just outweighs it, but then when we start to bring in positive ones, we go, oh, and it's not quite enough. The scale's still like this. But we start to feel it again and think it again and think. We just don't spend time doing it. We don't spend time doing it. We're so busy with the negative and sheltering ourselves from it, we don't think of the positive. And so the old behavior is fear of failure, right? I don't want to try that. I'm going to be comfortable right here. I ain't going to try that, because what if I fail? Instead, we want to have a growth mindset that says, man, I want to learn new things. It's okay to learn. It's okay to fail. And you can go right down the list. I'm helpless. I cannot trust anyone. I did something evil. New beliefs, well, I made a mistake. The old behavior is shame. The new one's self-forgiveness and love. Wow. And so we deal with our emotions. We're emotional creatures. God created us this way. Who wants to live a life without emotions? Now, I mean, I could live, without some of the sadness, but then we'd have to give up joy, right? I certainly don't want a bunch of anger and hate, but then we'd have to give up love and forgiveness. And so a lot of times we have those things, but we're going to go through 11 things that are going to help us regulate our emotions. We'll look at 5 of them tonight and 6 next week. How do we regulate this? How do we handle these difficult emotions, okay? Well, number 1 is to learn when we're immature with our emotions. We have 2 ways of processing events in our life. We can use a higher, more advanced form of processing, we call the high road, or a more primitive form of reaction called the low road, okay? So we want to recognize which road we're on. So on page 4, the higher form of processing that uses reflective thought processes, okay? We're not just reacting, We're being reflective. We want to go from being reactive to receptive to reflective, okay? So you might want to write that down. We want to go from reactive to being receptive. That's curious. Okay, what's going on? To reflective. We want to know more about it, right? It's flexible. It's resilient. This processing is centered and uses the prefrontal cortex of the brain. And look, we talked about this last week or a couple weeks ago, the different things that the prefrontal cortex do. Look at number 4. It helps us pause before acting. 5, it gives us empathy toward others. 6, helps us get insight. Number 3, balancing our emotions. 7, modulating our fear response. I mean, that part of our brain can really help us with all those. And if you're having a struggle with some of this, circle it. Say, Lord, help my prefrontal cortex do this. You've got the equipment. You've got the equipment. Maybe, have you ever had that? I had, when I first I was vice president of Central Baptist Children's Home. We were the largest child welfare agency in the country, and I just took over the position and inherited the staff, right? And I'd come from World Relief where I had this new software I knew about, and it was called Blackbaud and all that. And so I was real excited because the agency that I just became vice president for had that same software. And so I was excited. I was taking over their direct mail and all this kind of stuff, fundraising and development and everything. And I asked the secretary there to do these certain things. Oh, it doesn't do that. I mean, what? No, it doesn't do it. I'm pretty sure it's pretty strong software. I mean, it's, so then I went to a conference, and they were training on it, and I remember someone said something. I said, well, it doesn't do that. The whole table turned around and looked at me like, duh, what are you talking about? And, of course, they were all experienced users, right? And they just schooled me real quick. I couldn't wait to get back to that office and kindly remind the woman that, yeah, I can do that kind of stuff, and you better learn it pretty quick because we need it, So here we had this powerful software, and we were always using maybe 25% of it. Oh, I tell you what, it was crazy. Well, look, we've got tremendous software here, and we need to start using it. God has given us the capacity, okay? That's a big word. It's a good word. We need to build our capacity for joy. We need to build our capacity for loving ourselves. We can do this, okay? If our capacity is low, that's all right. We're going to build our capacity. And so, we have the tools for that. The prefrontal cortex is alive and well, and we can do it, okay? So, the low road is that immature processing. It's a lower form of processing used by the more brainstem, the visceral feedback from the body, the emotional part of the brain, the limbic regions, the amygdala. And that's when we sense a threat, usually from some unresolved trauma, right? Some things we react. Instead of being, receptive or reflective, we're reactive, and we shut down the higher processes. When that amygdala kicks in, it shuts off the communication to the prefrontal cortex. It shuts it off, so the rational part of the brain isn't kicking in here. We're moving. Now, that's what you want. I mean, if you're going to step out in the street and you hear a truck coming all of a sudden, you don't want to sit there and say, gee, is that new Mack truck that they've been talking about? Or is those Goodyear tires? That's what you'll be finding out real quick, right? No, you want to get out of the way, right? You don't have that time to figure out what kind of truck it is. You just know it's roaring and it's coming at a fast pace, and you're going to be nothing but a puddle on the ground, right, if you don't move. So, thank God for our amygdala that can get us to react. But when it comes to some of these fear responses in us, the monster in the basement, no one's going to like me, I wonder if I did it right, what will they say? Gee, I wonder if I'm going to get fired because of this. All these kind of things set those alarms off, and we need to quit being so reactive, and we do that by taking a deeper breath, relaxing a little bit, getting into it, right? And so it shuts that down. And when it shuts it down, I mean, doesn't it sound like cravings and panic attacks, OCD? I mean, all that's where it gets shut down, right? The low road ignores self-reflection, consideration of consequences, and other points of view. It happened to me last night. When we try to get our families together for the trips, right? It sounds nice on paper, but you got 4 different family systems coming together at once. And when you live together for a week, it can be a challenge. It can be a challenge. And we've had our share of challenges on that, right? And I'm people-pleasing Ron, right? Well, part of that is this balancing act. Everything's got to be, everything's got to be good. Oh, you're okay, I'll get that, and one over here, and. So my wife, bless her heart, she sends out a text to one of the boys about something that her and the daughter-in-law, they were thinking, and all of a sudden I go, you what? You what? I didn't even get to see it, vet it, or anything, because I'm a copywriter, right? I have, there's people-pleasing ways to say things, all right? My wife doesn't see it. She just puts it out there, and I'm thinking, and I tell you, I got upset. I got upset. In fact, she started to tear up. Then I really felt bad. But so don't think I don't need some of this stuff. I mean, it triggered me. And so I'm processing it. I've been processing it, and I did. And I'm still processing it. But I know what it did, and I'm working on it. And my wife and I are fine. We've worked it through. She'll let me in tomorrow night, but I'm sure that, I'll get the key back to the house. No, but anyways. But it's just I had to write that in the margin, give you a little example that these things, we can get our buttons pushed, right? Okay, so what I want you to do now, share the table. I shared my dirty laundry here, all right? Has there been a time when you used lower processing instead of higher processing? I was using lower processing. I was thinking of all this stuff, and my voice raised, everything. Have you had a time when, of course you have, but is there one that you want to share? Maybe when you used a little bit of low road processing instead of high road, okay? So take a few minutes and see if you want to talk about that at the table, okay? Those of you at home, you can do that too, or write down an example, all right? And we'll be back in just a few minutes. Let's take about one more minute, okay? All right, let's continue on page 4. Continue on page 4, okay? And I'm going to kind of go over this implicit memory thing again because I think it's key. For years, we were taught, that this comes out of our subconscious mind. Now, that's nice if you're writing theories, but when you're out there in the real world, you go, what the heck is that? I remember, being so anxious. I was a phobic child. I have phobias, and then in my 20s and up in my early 30s, I still had a lot of anxiety. I was functional, but I had a lot of anxiety. And I remember in my 20s, specifically when I was really wrestling with this, I was in the ministry and I was working on the things. And I remember crying out to God saying, Lord, just do something with my subconscious mind. I mean, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know what to do. And then, of course, you added the demonic. When people, being in the spiritual world, people would talk about that, and you go, oh, my goodness. Well, I learned some of the things that we can do there. And yet, it wasn't until, even after graduate school, we didn't learn a lot of this. It was only in the last probably 20 years that they've been coming out and talking about memories and implicit memories. And it makes sense. We get triggered. Triggers don't just happen. Triggers happen because something in our environment triggers us. It's something we see, smell, hear. It could be a word. It could be something. Something triggers us. And usually a trigger is due to a past memory. I'll give you an example. Well, let me read this first, okay? Our emotions run a range, okay? Let me give you the example, and then I'll get back to it. The example I was going to say is about this woman that had a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, and she was going to put him on her bicycle with training wheels, right? And now they got these other bikes, man. They're real low balance bikes. They're really cool. But anyways, training wheels, right? And so they had a little sloping driveway. And so she gets ready to put the baby on there, and she starts, and all of a sudden, she has this panic attack. It's just like, and her jaw hurt. And she said, well, honey, not now, we can't. I got to get back in the house. Well, if you ever had a panic attack, you know that it kind of grabs your attention, right? Well, later when she calmed down, she was on the phone with her mother, and she's telling her mother about this. She said, yeah, and I was ready, and all of a sudden, and she goes, well, honey, don't you remember? Oh, no, what? Well, when you were 3, 4 years old, we put you on a bike with training wheels, and you went down the driveway, and you fell, and you cut your chin. Well, she didn't remember that, or did she? That was an implicit, out of awareness, right, memory, until the right circumstance happened, situation. And that's why it's so interesting that a lot of these things come up when we start having children of our own. And newsflash, it happens again when we start having grandchildren. When we're around children a lot, it will bring up a lot of what we went through. We'll be reminded. It will wake up some of those things. And the good news is, if we can name it, we can tame it. If we can figure out some of that things, we can start to do it. So let's look at this. Our emotions run on a range. So number 1 was learn when we're immature in our emotions. 2, let's kind of rate and monitor them a little bit. There's a time to be afraid, and there's times to be really afraid. And yet this can go to an extreme maladaptive emotion, as in the case of panic, right? Terror or freeze. In anger, situations make us get frustrated, mad, or angry. But when we're traumatized and anger doesn't allow for correction in our situations, over time we go from intense adaptive emotions to an extremely toxic form of rage or vehement emotions, and it grows. And so there's hyperarousal, hypo, and that means low emotion, depressed, lethargic, self-loathing, detached from emotions, flat affect. And then there's the hyper. So we can be on either extreme, right? And that's more high emotions, anxious and edgy and caged in and angry. And our goal is to help regulate these toxic emotions that come from unresolved trauma in the form of implicit memories. And we'll get into that later on. But just to know that there's things that trigger you that seem to be out of your awareness, and it's a form of a memory. It's a form of a memory. The amygdala has memorized it, not your hippocampus, all right? Now, we can get in touch with the actual memory when we work with it, right? But there's hope. That's the thing. There's hope today. And I haven't had you say that. Tell the person next to you, there's hope today. All right? There's hope today. We can get in touch with these things. We're not victims, okay? We're not victims. We may have been victimized, but we don't have to remain victims, and that's the beautiful thing. Our goal is to help regulate these things, okay? And so when we carry these implicit memories and let it affect our current behavior, that's called intrusion, right? All of a sudden, I'm behaving one way. Someone says something, looks at me a certain way, and I'm reacting that it's intruded into me, right? It's intrusion, okay? And so what we want to do then is, as we go back to memories, we can come to it and reparent ourselves, and we'll get into that. And we can allow Jesus even to share the truth with us. Lord, sometimes I do that. Lord, what am I believing here? And I try to reflect on it. Why is this causing me so much pain? Why do I feel this way? And sometimes I try, is there a memory? Is there some time, Lord, when this started, I need to think about? And on the page 5, some of those questions, what am I feeling? What am I believing about the situation or consequences of those beliefs? What am I believing about me, right? And so, for example, if I believe that I'm worthless, there's a consequence to that. What do you do with worthless things? You throw them out, right? They get rid of. And see, that's where the fear comes in. If I said, you're gobbledygook, I don't think you'd be traumatized, right? I mean, you'd probably say, okay, Ron, so are you, or something, whatever. What the heck's he talking about, right? But if I said you're worthless, it's got a little bit different feeling to it. What's wrong with you? You never get anything right. You ever hear stuff like that? Yeah, see, those things, they have meanings. And often, children overemphasize them. Do you ever see a child when they get a little cut? I mean, just a drop of blood. Oh, I'm bleeding, right? They think that it's all going to come. They're going to die, And you try to calm them down, right? We become their emotional. It's okay, honey. It's okay. Hello, I'm bleeding. You can tell I've been around the grandchildren, but it's okay, And then and you calm them down. Soon but that's how exaggerated some things get. So that's why the amygdala gets turned on. Now, this reaction could have been when Mom cut her finger on a piece of glass and maybe was hysterical. Who knows, But it was modeled, perhaps, somewhere, maybe on TV. Who knows? Kids are watching all the time. So, anyways, what am I feeling? What am I believing? What's the consequence of believing that? Why would I be afraid of that? That'd be a good question. And here's the good thing. What is the truth? And if that doesn't do it for you, then ask yourself, what would be nice to believe about myself? Start there if you can't get to believing something. And if that don't work, what do you believe about someone else that you love? Would you allow them to think the negative things about them that you're thinking about yourself? No. You'd want to correct them. Well, let's do it for us sometimes, okay? So that kind of reflection will help, all right? We'll learn more about that. 3, learning more precise emotional language. This happens in counseling a lot. where a person is reacting to something and they've seen it only in a certain exaggerated form. Like, for example, boy, well, we'll get to it here. Many of our deep emotions ruminate over and over inside our heads. Our thoughts and self-talk, moving so fast, can often be confusing and full of misleading assumptions, beliefs, and thoughts. Our implicit memory, body, and visceral sensations, from the gut here, and childhood immature belief system can cause us to feel certain ways. All inside our heads, it's difficult to look at what we're feeling rationally. Instead, we're simply driven by these strong impulses, emotions, and habits. Remember the child? I'm bleeding, right now I'm going to, We look at it and say, oh, gee, I didn't cut myself very bad. Child doesn't have that ability, right? And so that's how we are with some of our emotions, right? We don't have that ability to see that it's just a little cut. Instead, we're simply driven by those impulses. If we were to stop these deep habitual brain pathways, we have to stop and integrate our left brain logic and right brain emotions and memories. We have to integrate them. We must learn what is true about us and live in its freedom. And language is one tool that can help us at least be more reasonable, right? We need to have the ability to express how we're feeling and differentiate it from other emotions and assumptions that we associate. This is what we call emotional literacy. It's like learning a new language. It's bringing thought and feeling together. If we can name it, we can tame it. All right, circle that. Because if we inaccurately name it, it's hard to tame. I'll give you some examples, all right? Not all emotion is the same. There's a difference between love and lust, right? Anger can be rage or it can be irritation. Our brain is a predicting machine and uses assumptions to predict the future. It's a predicting machine. And since our brain uses 30% of our body's energy, it strives to save this energy by moving our emotions in generalities. It wants to lump all of our emotions together. This makes returning to joy a lot harder. If you're annoyed, but your brain is reacting like you're really irritated, it'll be harder to return to joy from a feeling of irritation than in annoying circumstances. See, that's why the same thing can happen twice and we can react way worse the second time than the first, because the first time it's an annoyance. Somehow we see it in its right perspective. Boy, that's annoying. Please turn that down. That's annoying. But the other time we're coming in and we've got other baggage with us, other things. Hey, will you turn that down? I'm sick of it. How many times I got to tell you? Now, see, that's irritation, you see. And we need to sometimes put things into perspective. Should that have been just an annoyance? Why did I get so irritated? What's going on? What's happening here, see? And so if I can start being a little more specific and not allow that brain to go, right? Be more reflective, right? I'm reacting. No, quit reacting. Be reflective, or be receptive and reflective. And so I've given you some words here that you can take home, right? In fact, what I want you to do right now is turn the page and look at the fear and anger one, okay? Fear and anger. And just take a few minutes here, and then we'll take a break, and go through, circle some of the ones that you've experienced. Let's take fear, for example. Have you experienced anxiety? How about tenseness? Uneasiness? How about helplessness? Shock? Maybe you've done them all, but that's okay. I want you to start feeling the difference. Start seeing the difference, okay? And so do that with fear and anger, and then share at the table. Maybe you've kind of seen some differences, all right? And think of times when maybe you reacted in frustration, when maybe it was just disliking something or something, all right? So kind of look at that. Take a few minutes, and then we'll take a break and come back at 5 minutes after 8, okay? As you're doing that, kind of feel where it feels in your body a little bit. do you feel shock differently than you do uneasiness? Start to get what the body says, because that's part of the tool here. Is apprehension different than distress? Is outrage different than dislike or jealousy? All right, start. If we can name it, we can tame it. I remember asking a group that once, remember, I think you were here, Connie. I said, if we can name it, we can. And someone goes, reclaim it. We can claim it. And I go, no, that's the wrong message. That's a different message. If you can name it, you can claim it. Nah, wrong class, all right? We're talking about name and tame here, all right? All right. And when you're done with that, you can take a break. There's some sodas and water and treats in the back. I think there's a few Butterfingers left. And then, there's the bathrooms around the corner over here. So come back at 5 after. Just do the ones for fear and anger. You can do the others later if you want. All right. I'll get a drink and we'll get going, okay? So, learning a more precise emotional language. Number 4, and we're on page 6 here. And again, if you don't have the notes, you can get them by writing me, Ron, at empowerministry.org, and I'll be happy to send them to you. And just ask for tonight's lesson, number 19, or you can ask by the date, and I'll get it to you. And number 4 is going from low road brain processing immaturity to high road, okay? And we've kind of talked about that then, okay? And what happens is emotions are an important part of our life, right? And they spark something, and boom, that can turn into a firestorm, or it can be regulated and channeled into a productive experience, right? Much like a spark in an engine. Sparks can do different things, right? And so can our emotions, right? We can't help what emotions we have. A friend of mine told me the other day, he said, Ron, you can't help what thoughts you have or emotions you have. They're like birds, you know? They come, they land in the tree, but you don't have to let them make a nest, right? And that helps sometimes, you know? They come, but we don't have to let them nest, okay? Whoa, get out of here, you know? And so the low road is set off by a trigger, and we're looking at page 7 here. It's set off by a trigger, and look at the bold print as we go down. It's set off by a trigger. That's a situation where something causes a sensation that we see that's picked up by our right brain. It usually is a reaction to an unresolved emotional issue. And you can say that when you're reacting to something, you can pretty well guess that it's some unresolved thing going on. If you're over-emoting, I mean, if someone comes up, you know, says something and you react in the moment, fine. But if it's lingering, if it's overdone, then it's attached to something else. You know, if the first time you ever heard someone saying, you know, you really are stupid, well, you'd probably go, well, I don't know, my teachers didn't think that, and, you know, the way I'd studied, I'm not really stupid. You know, you'd probably... But if you've been called that a lot, and someone that you've given power to, like a person at work or someone, or maybe someone you didn't give power to says you're stupid, you're going to react. And a lot of times we're going to react to the unresolved. We've never resolved in our mind that we're not stupid, you know? And it's funny how that can work. Well, what happens is that that unresolved emotional issue is remembered by the amygdala, and so it creates cues, right? Cues. And that's a primitive safety device for survival, right? Facial expressions, tone of voice, types of sound, body language. I mean, how safe would you be if you didn't have touch? I mean, that's leprosy, right? How come people die of leprosy? Because they didn't have sensations, and they got infected. And the fingers and everything, they didn't have sensations. My brother Rod was in a motorcycle. He doesn't have sensations in this part of his arm. He can burn. I mean, if he was near, he could burn his arm and not even know it. Well, I mean, he'd know it probably from the smell and all the people looking in horror, you know. But you know, what would you can't hear, right? When you can't hear, you have to compensate, right? Because it's part of our safety mechanism. Sight, same thing. And so, you know, these things are there for our survival. And the sensations cause a reaction in the primitive emotional part of our brain. That reaction causes a transition, all right? Puts it in gear, all right? Puts it in gear. And that's where we move from a higher processing of events and allow the emotional center to take over. This leads to immersion. Isn't that, you know, these are cool words when you think, you're like immersed in it, right? When you're in it, right? Unfortunately, you ain't in it to win it. You're just, maybe you are, but you're in it, right? You're immersed, okay? And that immersion is where the emotional center of the brain immediately shuts down the rational part of the brain and sets off an alarm. Depending upon which neural pathway we have used over and over again, we'll either fight, take flight, freeze, or regulate our emotions in negative ways. I tended, in the real extreme ones, I was not flight, I was freeze. and that's not a fun one. I would pass out. I would, and so I learned that wasn't very good. And in fact, every once in a while, I can still smell smelling salts. My dad was a medic in the Army, so I don't know why he had smelling salts. And so all over him, I'm telling you what, that's a joke. That'll wake you up, right? Now, I'll never forget that. But I learned what the symptoms were, and I started learning how to overcome some of that, and so I became more of a people pleaser, because I figured people pleasing, then I can avoid the freezing, right? And so I never put myself in that situation, because I'm pleasing people, right? I'm fixing it, right? And of course, it puts me in other situations. And so what is your style? Are you more of a fighter, take flight, a freeze, or maybe it's different with different circumstances, but start learning how you react a little bit, where you can kind of, substance abuse. That's what? Escaping, right? That's flighting to some degree, right? I just want to numb out. I want to get out of here. There's all kinds of overindulgence in excitement, right? Substance. A lot of times we want to just escape. But then we come to recovery, right? Because we want to make a change. We can learn to recognize, right, instead of reacting to the cues. And that's where emotional recognition, we want to start to recognize what's going on. We want to pause, right? We want to be able to be receptive. Okay, I'm having a panic attack, not just having a panic attack. I'm recognizing, I'm getting a panic attack. And that's how I teach people how to get over it. I'm having one. It's faulty wiring. I don't have to listen to it. I'm just going to ride the wave. And it dissipates. It goes away. So if we can recover, if we can recognize instead of reacting to cues, we can reflect on the origins, and that's what I've been saying. And the good one, Lord, take me to a memory where I felt this way before. Increase my understanding, right? And we can bring our mature self and Jesus into the memory. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we'll get into later that can help us overcome that. I've done it to myself, with different experiences I thought, and I'll ask the Lord, this is what I'm believing there. When I was, that certain thing happened, and what's the truth? What do you think about that? Is there anything you want to tell me? God is interactive, but we don't ask him things. Have you ever asked God if he loves you? Now, that can be scary. So what if he doesn't? Right? But the fact is, he does. He does. And a lot of times, Lord, what? And now, what we usually ask is why. And I get that. That's probably the number one question is why. And that's a hard one because things happen. But there's so many other things we can ask God about. Lord, what do you think of me? Lord, how did I do today? Lord, is there anything you want me to learn through this? Lord, this is how I feel. What do you think? And we start to meditate and think with the Lord, and we allow the Holy Spirit, which is a comforter, to work in us. We allow our more mature self to start getting in the conversation. And that's all part of recovery, right? Is starting to learn some of the truth and then resolved. Although we can experience recovery by ourselves, to resolve issues and become mature, we need others with mature right brains to teach our right brains how to act. It's through synchronization. And so when we start to learn the truth, facing the fact that I felt was unlovable was one thing. Starting to teach on it was another, because now I let you know about it. And now it's out in the world. And now I can see how other people react to that. And when I start believing some things about myself, and I start sharing with others, if they're good friends, I wouldn't go to the most toxic person I know and say, hey, I'm starting to feel good about myself. And I go, oh, I'll help you with that, Yeah. How dare you do that? Quit bragging. I heard that one all the time. Quit bragging, And, don't talk about yourself, And so, But if we have someone said, I just kind of had a feeling, I had this epiphany last night that all of a sudden I felt that God really was happy with me. Now, if that's a good friend, wouldn't they be happy for you to know that? And what do you think their face is going to do? Do you think their face is going to go, or, No, they're going to go, it's about time. I'm so glad you know that. And boom, right there, mirror neurons, man, start firing. And see that we aren't meant to be alone. This input, all of a sudden, that smile on their face connects with ours. And guess what? Then we smile. We don't even know it. And right there, it's starting to go into the brain. And those little synapses are running around there, right? And they're just starting, and we're starting to learn a new truth. So it's good that we learn these stories about ourselves and the correction of our stories and who we really are, and we share it with some people that we trust and love, where we can get the reactions to start feeling safe. I don't joke around when I say, when I first started saying I'm lovable, I couldn't say it out loud. I couldn't. I was afraid that I don't know where it was coming from. I was going to get this cosmic slap across the head saying, what are you talking about? Don't do, what? It was drilled in me somehow. But I remember the first time I said it, I whispered it. I was talking to God, and I thank you, Lord, that you love me unconditionally. I actually whispered it. I mean, I almost wanted to laugh because, it was only me and God, and he already knew it, But that's how these things are. It's crazy. But then I said it again and again. I started saying it again, and then I started teaching on it. And the first time I said it out loud to you guys, and a couple years ago, whenever, helped make it feel a little bit more real. And so it takes that, right? And that's where it starts coming from. But what are some of the low roll methods instead? Well, we can escape, like we said, overindulgence and excitement. Are we adrenaline junkie or always have to keep busy? Substance, compulsive behavior, avoidance. We can avoid things. People, getting enmeshed in certain relationships, emotionalism, sex, right? Also, isolation. We can isolate, retreat from others and meetings and just, being by ourselves. Isolation is a kiss of death. We are relational people, and we need to really try. Call that friend. Say, listen, I'm isolating. Can we maybe get coffee or something? I'm just going through it. Negative rumination, right? We keep playing the same old sad story over and over again. Listen to your stories. Start changing some of them. Yes, it may be that you've been victimized, but can you have a ray of hope there somewhere where you aren't a victim all the time? Maybe you're in recovery. Share that story. I'm getting better, you see? And then a lot of times by making bad choices, right? And so a lot of times it happens because it's impulsive, and then it becomes compulsive. And this escapes, right? Behaviors add to the emotional state that we're already in, and we're on page 8 here at the top. We move from looking for something pleasurable in light of our situation, which is an impulse. A lot of times addictions start off, people tell me all the time, I was 10 years old when I took my first drink, and God, for the first time I felt normal. Well, I know now that's a chemical thing, right? The serotonin and dopamine's all messed up, and alcohol affects all 5 of the neurotransmitters, the major transmitters in the brain, and of course it's going to make you feel, if you've been dysregulated, if you're deficient in serotonin and GABA and dopamine and endorphins and that, then obviously alcohol is going to all of a sudden make you feel like you're alive, right? Cigarette smoking, nicotine affects 3 of the transmitters. They do their job for a while, but then it comes crashing in, right? And so sometimes we look for those things, it becomes an impulse. And we want to avoid a negative. So isolating, I'm not going to go to that party, right? Pretty soon, though, it becomes a compulsion. It's not an impulse anymore. We're in a pattern here. We're in a habit. And there's cravings going on, if that's the case. We go from impulsive to compulsive. And it's a compulsive thing now. And sometimes what adds to it is the fact that there's consequences. When we're in a cycle of addiction, a lot of times there's consequences. Maybe it's the cost. Maybe it's the relational consequences. Maybe it's our job, whatever. Sometimes there's now we're feeling bad about that. And so AA and other ones, they have, in their steps, one of them is to make amends. And I get that. Amends is a way to what? Kind of take the past and hopefully straighten some of it out so you aren't feeling so bad about that. They were genius in saying, hey, let's get rid. We've got to do damage control here. Now that I've decided not to do this anymore, I got to go back and hopefully build some new bridges. Build trust again, right? But the trouble is that doesn't necessarily take care of the original problem. And if we don't, then all of a sudden, pretty soon, we're going to be impulsive again. But this time it comes back. And the thing is, we start back where we left off. That's why so many people die of heroin. They haven't used for a while. They haven't used for years or whatever, and all of a sudden they do heroining and something happened, a trauma happened, and their brain says, I just got to get out of here. And where do they go? They go back to the level that they were at when they quit, which a well-used heroin addict is going to be doing how many bags a day, right? And so and then now it's laced with whatever, and boom, their heart isn't ready for it. And they OD. And that's what happens. And so we go back. So that's why it's good to take care of amends. That will help some of the guilt and stuff that's agging us on. But let's also get in touch with what was some of the original things. And if we can do both of those, oh my goodness, that's going to be tremendous. But it takes time. It takes time. And there's help for that. And we can get the help that we need. If some of you are struggling with some of that, you can go ahead and write me, Ron, at Empower Ministry. I get calls every week where I help people try to figure out a plan for them to get out of some of these compulsive behaviors. And so what are some high road methods for dealing with our impulsiveness or compulsiveness? Number one, fast forward the movie, right? Try to remember, where's it going? I know the ending, it's like, the Titanic, right? You know the ending, right? This ain't going to be pretty, You're going for a car crash, you know how it's going to end, okay? So play the tape forward. Another one's get healthy. A lot of these things, like I said, are chemical-based, physically based. There's all kinds of things that can cause this. So eating right, exercising, get enough quality sleep, proper nutrition, there's all kinds of ways. Prayer and meditation, the spiritual disciplines are keystone habits to greater emotional health. Meditating on God's unconditional love, reading, letting Him reparent us. I'm working on that transcript on reparenting, and I'm telling you, it's changing me. It's tremendous to think about the Father's love. What God was so intentional. It's all throughout the Bible. I never knew it was in so many places where He's adopted us. It's just born again. It's just tremendous. It's exciting how God wants to really cause us to mature. And then listening for and correcting lies that we're believing. That's what we've been talking about all night. Healthy relationships. Sometimes we have to stop the toxic relationships. Doesn't mean they have to be totally out of our life, but man, let's not go back for seconds, sometimes, We don't, sometimes we just have to separate ourselves from some of that. And, and then getting, professional help. Sometimes it's good to sit down with a counselor and talk about these things. We have blind spots, and there's no shame in getting the help that we need, okay? And then the fifth thing we'll finish with tonight is on page 9, and that's learning to calm ourselves so we can focus on the now. And focusing is key to regulating our emotions. In our book, Find Your Focus Zone, the doctor there explains how we are meant to best function in a zone that's between understimulated and overstimulated, under-aroused or hyper-aroused, so it's in between those. When we are understimulated, we are bored or too spacey. When we are overstimulated, we're too hyper to focus. Some of us go back and forth between the extremes. Instead, God has given us everything we need to become self-aware of our stimulation level and bring it up or down so we're functional at optimal attention, okay, relaxed and alert. So first, we can, number one, know where we are in arousal scale. Think of your emotions, where you are in the moment. Are you under-aroused, bored out of your mind? Think of your emotions. Where are you? And, it's sort of like a cup of coffee, right? If I don't drink coffee, but if it's too hot, right, you burn everything, you can't drink it, right? Although I don't know, some people like their coffee really hot, right? If it's too cold, unless you like iced coffee, I guess, but basically you want it somewhere in between there, and that's where we want to be. We want to be in kind of an optimal place there, between a 4 and a 7. Now, it's interesting because we need to be at different levels throughout the day. It doesn't mean that we're never low or we're never high. Think about it. A boxer gets out there, can't be, at arousal level 1 or 2. They'd be Bobo the Clown instead of a boxer, right? You ever see Bobo the Clown? It's that thing you hit that just comes back for more, right? No, a boxer needs to be at about a 7, 8, or a 9, right? Real alert. Think of a basketball player. When they're going in for the layup, they better be at a 7 or an 8, right? They're watching, they're looking, where they're going, right? But when they're at the free throw line, do they want to be at a 7 or 8? Or do they want to be more like a 2 or 3 or 4? A little more calm. That's why they're dribbling that ball. They're coming down, right? They're getting ready, right? Golfer, right? The golfer doesn't want to be, 7 or 8, no thanks. Right? So there are different times when we need to be in different arousal levels, right? But what we want to do, if we're going around in a 7 and 8 all day long, then somehow we need to recognize that. If we're in a 1 or 2 or 3 all day long, how are we doing our job? How are we doing? So we need to monitor this a little bit, okay? And so we can bring ourselves down from the hyper arousal. And we can then do things to, bring ourselves back up too. Counseling a lot of times helps when we're going too much in the hypo. When we're down too much, sometimes we may need to talk to someone about that if that lasts. But the hyper one, the hyper anxiety and that kind of stuff, there are some things we can do, right? And we know that it affects us. One is this open focus is really kind of interesting thing. And it's a way that this Dr. Femi worked for 30 years on the theory of open focus, and there's an alpha and theta state of brain waves, and so he had some exercises, and what he did was he found out that if you focused on space, you could calm yourself down. And so the hand is one of the most sensitive parts of our body. I mean, we're always touching things, right? So it takes up a lot of our brain. A lot of our brain stimulation comes from our sensations, and this is one of the big ones. Of course, our ears. So when they've drawn a humulus or whatever, what's a person look like to the brain? It's got big ears, big nose, big old honking hands, right? And so, so the hands are one. If you want to calm the whole brain down, sometimes you think. And so what I want you to do is just close your eyes, and I want you to think of your hands kind of in front of you, and I want you to think of the space around your thumb. Think of the space around your thumb. Now think of the space between your thumb and your index finger. Now think of the space around your hand. Okay, you can open your eyes. By that little bit, I'm pretty sure you already could start to feel you're starting to go into an alpha state. It's amazing how space, when we do that. But I've given you some here that you can do and practice it. And if you want, come back and talk to me about that. Another one's expert in relaxing. And the thing is, we got to be careful about relaxing because there's some false soothers, right? And I got them on the bottom of 10. Turning on the TV, eating junk food, getting on the phone and sharing about our negative experiences, finding something wrong and get angry, rush into the next activity, grab a drink, smoke a joint. I mean, we think those things work, but they're really not. They're not healthy, relaxing. Okay, that's not the healthy kind of things, right? Positive ways, there's things over here on page 11, breathing. Breathing really helps. Reading scriptures, talking to God, taking a walk, meditating on God's love for you, quietly listening to relaxing music, take a bath or a shower, spend a few quiet minutes with a pet, right, or plants. Relax with a loved one in quietness for a few moments. If you really need to, call to someone that can help you. And then there's biblical calming truths. And when I did this, in fact, myself, I do a lot. If you breathe on the exhale, you can say some of these phrases, and I've given you one, like God gives me peace on page 12. God takes delight in me. I will not lose heart, or I put my trust in God. Those are phrases you could say that might be appropriate to the situation, and I've given you scriptures that will help you even remember. I live in God's perfect peace. Can you imagine just really believing that when you're anxious on the exhale? And here's the secret on breathing. If you really want to relax, you can breathe in 4 count, but breathe out 8. Double the time that you breathe out, because that's the relaxing part. The exhaling is the relaxing part. A lot of times we're taught 4 in, 4 out, and I get it. I teach that myself too. But if you really want to relax, and then, and what I like about that is it gives me more time to say, I live in God's perfect peace. And can you imagine? As you're exhaling, you start saying, and you got scripture you can memorize right here that will help you with that. So that's some of the things. Again, I encourage you to read these things. This is, we try to get through a lot in class, but, take it home, go over it again. Circle the things that God's speaking to your heart, okay? Next week, we'll come back to this. We'll continue on part 2, but let's just give it back to God. Father, I thank you that you know about us and you care about our emotions. I thank you, Lord, that you want us to regulate them. You want to help us. You're interactive. You love us, Lord, and you want to talk to us. You want to share with us. Lord, I pray that we'll start to meditate on the love you have for us. The Lord will take some of these things and start to regulate our emotions. And Lord, help us get in touch with some of the things that we're believing. And then, Lord, help us to start to think, what's the truth? Lord, might we start going down this road now? A new road, a different road, a road of more awareness, a road that's going to take a while, but we're on the road. So help us, Lord, I pray. And we'll thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, don't forget, we're going to have a seminar here March 5th of Overcoming Anxiety. You can go to www.ronovitt.com/MVC. Moraine Valley Church, all right? And you can find all the information you need on there, okay?